Owen Parker slammed his last $20 bill on the kitchen table so hard the salt shaker toppled over. His daughter Lucy stared at it. 8 years old, still in her pajamas, already knowing what that sound meant. They were completely out of time. "Daddy," she whispered, "are we going to be okay?" He had no answer. He just grabbed the crumpled job listing off the counter and walked out the door. One position, one impossible woman. 112 people had already failed before him. What Owen didn't know yet, what would change everything, was that the woman behind those locked iron gates hadn't been rescued by any of them. She'd been waiting for someone exactly like him. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss what happens next. The letter said 9 o'clock sharp. Owen Parker showed up at 8:50, standing on the sidewalk outside 14 Aldrich Place, in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, staring up at a brownstone that cost more than everything he'd ever owned in his entire life, combined. 4 stories of old brick and iron, ivy climbing the east wall like it had somewhere better to be. A black intercom panel beside a gate that looked like it was designed to keep people out rather than let them in. He checked his reflection in the window of a parked car. A blue button-down shirt that he'd ironed 3 times that morning. Dark trousers. Shoes polished with the last of Lucy's school glue because he'd run out of actual shoe polish 2 weeks ago and hadn't had the money to replace it. He looked like a man trying very hard to look like someone he wasn't. That was the truth of it. He was trying. That was all he had left. Trying. Owen Parker was 44 years old. He'd spent the last 17 years in construction, framing houses, pouring foundations, wiring up rooms that other people would eventually call home, while he drove back to an apartment that got smaller every time the rent went up. He wasn't a personal assistant. He had never been a personal assistant. He'd found the job listing crumpled at the bottom of a recycled pile of newspapers at the public library on 81st Street, and the salary listed was so far beyond anything he'd ever earned that he'd laughed out loud right there in the reading room, and 2 elderly women had turned to look at him. He hadn't laughed since. The job: personal assistant to Ms. Celeste Vaughn. Full-time, live adjacent. Must be reliable, discreet, patient, and physically capable of assisting with daily care needs. Previous experience preferred but not required. Candidates who cannot handle pressure need not apply. Previous experience. He'd been a foreman on a job site in Queens for 8 years. He could manage a crew of 20 men in the rain without raising his voice. He could carry 200 pounds of drywall up 4 flights of stairs alone if he had to. What he could not do was schedule appointments, answer phones with any kind of polish, or make a proper cup of tea. He knew that. He'd looked up what personal assistants actually did the night before on the library computer, and his stomach had dropped like a stone. But Lucy's daycare bill was 3 months overdue. The landlord had slipped a final notice under the door on Tuesday, and Owen Parker had exhausted every other option he could think of. So here he was, 8:50 in the morning, standing outside a gate he wasn't sure he deserved to walk through, about to interview for a job he probably wasn't going to get. He pressed the intercom. A long silence. Then a voice, female, crisp, with an accent that carried no warmth whatsoever, came through the speaker. "Name?" Not a question, a command. "Owen Parker. I have a 9 o'clock. You're early." Yes, ma'am. That's either a good sign, or it means you have nowhere else to be. Which is it?" Owen blinked. He wasn't sure how to answer that. He settled on the truth. Both, honestly. Another silence. Then a buzz and the gate swung open. The woman who met him at the door was not Celeste Vaughn. She was a small, efficient-looking woman in her 50s, named Mrs. Adler. The household manager, she explained, without offering a handshake. She walked him through the foyer and into a sitting room that smelled like old books and something floral he couldn't name, moving quickly, speaking even faster. Ms. Vaughn will see you at exactly 9. She runs on schedule. Not approximately 9. 9. If the clock on that mantel says 9 and you are still standing here talking to me, you have already failed. Understood, Owen said. The position has a 2-week trial period, no exceptions. 17 candidates have already completed their trials. None were retained. Do you still want to proceed? 17, he repeated. The listing said 112 total applicants. 17 made it to trial. None made it to permanent. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I say this not to discourage you, Mr. Parker. I say it so that you understand exactly what you're walking into. I appreciate that, he said. And he meant it. She studied him for a moment, with a kind of look that said she had seen a lot of people walk through this door, and knew exactly how most of their stories ended. She'll be difficult, Mrs. Adler said quietly. Not because she is cruel, though she will seem cruel. Because she is in pain. Constant, daily, unrelenting pain. And she has been for 3 years. Keep that in mind. Owen nodded. He didn't ask anything else. He'd been in pain before. He understood the kind that made you snap at people who didn't deserve it. At exactly 9 o'clock, Mrs. Adler opened the double doors to the study and stepped aside. Celeste Vaughn was sitting beside the window in her wheelchair, her back half turned to the door, looking out at the garden below. She didn't turn when he entered. She let him stand there. Owen counted 7 seconds before she spoke. You're a construction worker. It wasn't a question. He'd listed it on his resume. Former, he said. 4 men. Past tense because you were laid off, or because you chose to leave? Layoff. Site closed down. Company restructured. How long ago? 7 months. And in 7 months, this... She finally turned, gesturing toward him with a slight tilt of her chin. Is the best opportunity you could find. He held her gaze. She was younger than he'd expected. Early 40s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back tight. Eyes that were brown and sharp, and looked like they had been angry for so long that anger had become their resting state. She was beautiful, in the way that certain things are beautiful when they've been through something. Not in spite of it, but because of it. Like weathered stone. Like ironwork. Like something built to withstand. It's the best opportunity I applied for, he said. There's a difference. Her eyes narrowed. Why this one, specifically? The salary, he said. No hesitation. At least you're honest. I found that lying in interviews takes energy I don't have anymore. She tilted her head slightly, and something passed across her face. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't hostility either. It was closer to interest, the cautious, guarded interest of a person who has been disappointed enough times that they've almost stopped expecting anything different. Tell me about your daughter. He went still. How do you... Mrs. Adler is thorough. Reference checks include social media. You posted about her on Facebook 14 months ago. Her school play. You were tagged by someone named Marcus Webb, who is apparently your former colleague and also one of your references. Owen exhaled slowly. Her name is Lucy. She's 8. Her mother passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer. It's been the 2 of us since. Celeste was quiet for a moment. And she's the reason you're sitting across from me right now. She's the reason I do everything, Owen said. Yes. Another silence. Different this time. Heavier. Like a door swinging open that had been closed a long time. Then Celeste looked down at the resume in her lap and said, "You have no formal training in personal assistance, healthcare assistance, scheduling, or household management. You have no experience with mobility equipment or disability support. You cannot speak French, which is relevant because I have a standing weekly call with my attorneys in Paris. You don't know how to use half the software platforms I rely on daily." "That's all accurate," Owen said. "So tell me one reason. One. Why I should not have Mrs. Adler show you out right now." Owen leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at her directly. "Because every single person who walked through that door before me tried to impress you," he said. "And you fired every one of them. So impressing you clearly isn't working. And I've got nothing to impress you with anyway." He paused. "What I've got is a man who's been through enough that he doesn't rattle easy. Who knows what it's like to keep moving when everything hurts. Who will show up every day and tell you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable, especially then. I'm not going to pretend I'm something I'm not to get this job. I need this job too much to lie to you about it." Celeste Vaughn stared at him for a long time. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, somewhere in the garden, a bird landed on the iron fence and then flew away. 2 weeks, she finally said. Trial period. Mrs. Adler will give you the schedule, the protocols, the emergency contacts, and the list of rules. There are 43 rules. Learn all of them before tomorrow morning. 43, he repeated. Is that a problem? No, he said. He'd memorized longer blueprints on worse timelines. No problem at all. Mr. Parker, he was halfway to standing. Yes? If you last 3 days without quitting or making me regret this, I'll be surprised. She turned back to the window. That is not a challenge. It is a statistical statement based on available evidence. Owen stood up fully. Then I guess we're about to make some new statistics. He didn't look back. He wasn't sure if she was watching. But he felt something, a faint, barely there shift in the air between them, like pressure changing before a storm rolls in. He stepped out into the hallway, where Mrs. Adler was already waiting with a clipboard. The rules were not 43. They were 47. Mrs. Adler handed him the laminated list in the kitchen and watched his face while he read. Rule 1. Ms. Vaughn takes her breakfast at 7:15 a.m., not 7:10, not 7:20. Rule 7. Do not initiate conversation before 9 a.m. unless there is a medical emergency or structural damage to the property. Rule 12. Ms. Vaughn does not accept sympathy. Do not offer it. Rule 19. The left rear wheel of the wheelchair tends to drift. Adjust accordingly without being asked. Rule 23. Do not touch anything on her desk without explicit permission, not even to straighten. Rule 31. She takes her pain medication at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. Do not remind her. She knows. But note whether she takes it. She sometimes doesn't. Rule 38. When she is having a bad day, she will not tell you. You will know because she gets quieter, not louder. Quiet is harder than loud. Rule 44. Do not ask how she became injured. She will tell you if she decides to. She probably won't. Owen read every word twice. Then he folded the list and put it in his shirt pocket against his chest. Questions? Mrs. Adler asked. Rule 38, he said. Quiet is harder than loud. You wrote that yourself, didn't you? That's not from her. Mrs. Adler looked at him with something that flickered between respect and surprise. before her expression closed back down to neutral. "Get some sleep, Mr. Parker. 7:15 comes early." He was back the next morning at 6:50. He stood in the kitchen with Mrs. Adler's assistant, a young woman named Priya who handled the shopping and household inventory, and learned the breakfast routine in real time. Steel-cut oats, not rolled. Almond milk, not dairy. The coffee had to be exactly 185 degrees, not boiling. There was a thermometer in the second drawer. "She sent back the last one because the oatmeal was 3 minutes overcooked," Priya told him, keeping her voice low. "The one before that because he called her Miss instead of Ms. The one before that, well, we don't really talk about that one." "What happened?" He tried to be inspiring. He printed out a motivational poster and put it on her desk. Owen winced. What did it say? "Every day is a new beginning." She called his agency within 30 seconds of seeing it and had him removed from the building. Priya handed Owen the coffee thermometer. "Just don't try to fix her. That's the main one. Nobody who's tried to fix her has lasted." Owen checked the temperature. 186. He waited 30 seconds, checked again. 185 exactly. He poured the coffee. The first 3 days were like learning a new language, in a country where everyone already knew you were a foreigner. He made mistakes. On day 1, he adjusted her wheelchair without being asked, and she told him, very quietly and very precisely, that she would let him know when she needed adjusting, and that anticipating her needs was not the same as helping her. It was presuming. And presuming was the one thing she would not tolerate. He said, "You're right, I'm sorry. I won't do that again." She paused, a small, almost imperceptible pause, and then moved on. He didn't do it again. He waited to be asked. On day 2, she said, "Left wheel," and he corrected it immediately, without a word, and she didn't acknowledge it. But she didn't criticize him either. And by day 3, he understood the difference between those two things. Silence with Celeste Vaughn was never nothing. Silence was a verdict. He was learning to read the verdicts. The hardest part wasn't the schedule. The hardest part wasn't the 47 rules, or the 185-degree coffee, or the way she went completely silent every afternoon between 2 and 3 p.m., and he never knew why. The hardest part was watching someone live inside a cage of their own pain and knowing that the worst thing you could do, the thing that would cost you everything, was try to open the door. On day 4, she threw a book. Not at him, at the wall. He was standing in the doorway when it happened. He'd come to let her know the Paris call was ready, and the thick hardcover came off the desk and hit the wall across the room with a sound like a gunshot. He didn't flinch. She looked at him, and for a moment he saw something he hadn't expected. Not rage, not contempt, just exhaustion. The deep, bone-level exhaustion of a person who was tired of fighting something that wouldn't stop fighting back. "The call," she said, flat, cold, already retreating. "Ready when you are," he said. "Take your time." She wheeled past him without another word. He stayed in the doorway until she was out of sight, then walked to where the book had landed, The Complete Works of Edith Wharton, and picked it up. He found its place on the shelf. He put it back. He never mentioned it. On day 5, Lucy got sick. She'd been staying with Owen's neighbor, Mrs. Reyes, a retired schoolteacher on the 4th floor of his building in the Bronx, who watched Lucy on the days she wasn't in school and never asked for more than a few dollars and a thank you. Mrs. Reyes called him at 2 in the afternoon, the quiet hour, and said Lucy had a fever of 101 and was asking for him. He was standing in the hallway outside Celeste's study. The Paris call had run long. He was supposed to have taken her to a medical consultation at 3, then prepare the evening schedule, then handle correspondence until 6. He stood there for 10 seconds, staring at his phone. Then he knocked on the door.
What? He opened the door.
She was at her desk, pen in hand, not looking up. "Ms. Vaughn," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need to tell it to you straight." Now she looked up. "My daughter has a fever. My neighbor is with her, and she's not in danger, but she's asking for me. And she's 8 years old, and she doesn't have a mother." He held her gaze. "I will finish everything on today's schedule if you need me to. I won't leave until you tell me I can go. But I need you to know that this is happening, because I won't lie to you about where my head is." The silence lasted a long time. Celeste set down her pen. "Who's covering her medical appointment if she needs one? I'll call her pediatrician from here. Give me 20 minutes to reschedule your consultation, and I can be available by phone for anything else you—" "Go," Celeste said. He stopped. "I can stay until— Mr. Parker." Her voice was different, not softer exactly, but something had moved in it, like a current shifting beneath still water. "Go home to your daughter. We'll manage the schedule tomorrow." He stood there for one more second, not because he was hesitating, but because he hadn't been expecting it. "Thank you," he said. She had already turned back to her desk, but he could see from where he stood that she wasn't reading what was in front of her. She was looking out the window. He got home in 40 minutes. Lucy was curled up on Mrs. Reyes's couch under 2 blankets, her dark hair sweaty against her forehead. When she saw him, she didn't say anything. She just opened her arms. He sat on the edge of the couch and pulled her in, and she pressed her face against his neck, and he held on, and neither of them talked for a while. "Daddy," she said eventually. "Yeah, baby?" "Is the new job okay?" He laughed a little. It surprised him. "It's complicated." "Is the lady mean?" He thought about it. He thought about the book against the wall. He thought about quiet is harder than loud. He thought about the way she'd said go, not indifferently, not as a dismissal, but as something that cost her something. "She's going through something hard," he said. "People who are going through something hard sometimes seem mean, but it's not the same thing." Lucy was quiet. Her fever was breaking. He could feel it. "Like how you were after Mommy died?" she said. He went still. "You weren't mean," she added quickly. "You were just really quiet. And sometimes you looked like you forgot where you were." He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "Yeah," he said. "Like that." The next morning, he was back at 6:50. Coffee at 185 degrees. Oatmeal on time. He slid the breakfast tray onto the table beside Celeste's chair without a word. She picked up the mug, took a sip, and said, "How is she?" Owen paused in the middle of organizing the morning correspondence. "Fever broke at midnight. She's back at school. Good." A pause. "She has your eyes, apparently. Mrs. Adler mentioned a photo on your phone lock screen." "She does," Owen said. "She also has her mother's stubbornness, which causes me daily problems." A silence. And then, so brief he almost missed it, Celeste made a sound. Small. Low. Not quite a laugh, but not nothing either. Owen kept his face neutral and went back to the correspondence. But something had moved. Something small and breakable and real. And for the first time in 7 months of closed doors and quiet defeats, and the particular loneliness of a man who had stopped knowing who he was when he stopped being someone's husband, Owen Parker felt it. The turning of something. Not hope exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of it. The second week of Owen's trial began on a Monday that felt like it had been waiting for him. He walked through the gate at Aldrich Place at 6:45, 5 minutes earlier than his usual early. and found Mrs. Adler already in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her coffee, and a look on her face that said something had happened before he arrived. "She had a bad night," Mrs. Adler said, without preamble. Owen set his bag down. "How bad?" "Bad enough that she canceled her morning therapy session and didn't tell anyone until the therapist called me directly at 6 a.m. because Celeste wasn't answering her phone." Mrs. Adler turned her mug in her hands. "She does this sometimes, when the pain gets ahead of her medication window. She doesn't sleep, she doesn't call anyone, she just endures it alone and then comes out the other side angrier than before." "Has she eaten?" "She won't answer her door." Owen nodded once. He picked up the coffee thermometer and started the oatmeal without another word. At exactly 7:15, he carried the breakfast tray to her room and knocked. Silence. He knocked again. "Ms. Vaughn, it's 7:15. Nothing. He stood there. He thought about Rule 7. Do not initiate conversation before 9 o'clock unless there is a medical emergency. He thought about Rule 12. Do not offer sympathy. He thought about what Priya had said. Don't try to fix her. Then he thought about something that wasn't on any list. Something he'd learned not from a laminated sheet, but from 4 years of raising a grieving child alone. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone in pain is simply refuse to leave. "I'm going to leave the tray outside your door," he said, keeping his voice even, the same way he'd talk to a crew member who was about to make a dangerous decision on a job site. No pressure, no judgment, just steady. "Coffee's at 185, oatmeal's fresh. I'll be in the study whenever you're ready." He set the tray down and walked away. 40 minutes later, the empty tray was sitting outside the door. By 9 o'clock, she was in the study. She didn't mention the morning. He didn't either. He went through the correspondence, read her the flagged emails, noted the responses she dictated, and moved through the schedule with the kind of quiet efficiency that he'd figured out by now was what she actually needed. Not cheerfulness, not conversation, just competence. Just someone who showed up and did what needed doing without requiring anything from her in return. She was in more pain than usual. He could see it in the set of her jaw, in the way she held herself slightly off-center in the chair, favoring her right side. She didn't say a word about it. He didn't ask. But when he handed her a document to review, he noticed her hand trembled slightly before she steadied it against the desk. He went back to the correspondence. At exactly 11 o'clock, he placed her pain medication on the desk beside her coffee, without interrupting whatever she was reading. She took it. He noted it. Neither of them spoke. Around 11:45, she said, without looking up, "You've been quiet all morning." "You seem like you needed it quiet," Owen said. A pause. "Most people fill silence because it makes them uncomfortable, not because the other person needs it." "I know," he said. "I used to do that too." She looked up then, not with warmth. He'd stopped expecting warmth from her in the way you stopped expecting rain in the middle of a dry July, but with something. Attention. Real attention. The kind that actually lands on you instead of sliding past. "What changed?" she asked. Owen kept his eyes on the screen. "My wife died," he said. "And for a while after that, I just needed people to be present without needing anything back. Most people couldn't do it. They'd come over and they'd talk, and they'd try to say the right thing, and the whole time all I could think was, I need you to just stop. Just be here and stop filling it up." Celeste was quiet. "Lucy taught me," he continued. "She was 4 when her mother passed. She didn't have words for half of what she was feeling. She'd just crawl into my lap and sit there, And after a while, I learned that sometimes sitting there was the whole thing. That was the entire job. Just don't leave and don't make noise. He hit send on an email and moved to the next one in the queue. She sounds like a perceptive child, Celeste said finally. She's terrifying, Owen said. In the best way. And there it was again, that small, almost imperceptible sound. Not quite a laugh, but closer this time. The trial ended on a Friday. Owen didn't bring it up. He figured Celeste would address it when she was ready, and he'd been around her long enough now to know that pushing her toward anything before she chose to move was the fastest way to make sure she never moved at all. He was in the kitchen at 6:15. The household was quieter on Fridays. Priya came in late. Mrs. Adler had a standing appointment off-site when he heard the wheelchair coming down the hall. He checked the time. It was far too early for her to be up. She came through the kitchen door and stopped. He turned. She was still in what she slept in. A dark shirt, loose pants, her hair down, which he'd never seen before. She looked different without the armor of her daytime presentation. Not smaller exactly, just more real. Like the version of herself she kept most carefully hidden. "You're early," he said. "I own the building," she said. "I'll be early if I want." "Fair enough." He went back to the coffee. 185 is 2 minutes away. She didn't leave. She moved to the kitchen table, something she'd never done before, not in the 2 weeks he'd been there, and positioned herself beside it. He set the mug in front of her when it was ready, and went back to preparing the oatmeal. "The trial ends today," she said. "I know. I don't make decisions about this lightly." "I wouldn't expect you to." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "You made 11 errors in the first 2 weeks. I documented all of them." Owen nearly smiled. Of course she had. 11 sounds about right. 7 of them were procedural. Schedule conflicts, formatting issues, one incident with the Paris attorneys that I won't go into detail about, but that you are aware of. "I am aware of it," he said. The Paris attorney incident had involved Owen accidentally patching the wrong call through at the wrong time and connecting Celeste's real estate lawyers with what turned out to be a pharmaceutical company's mergers team. It had lasted 4 minutes before anyone realized, and the aftermath had been educational. "The other 4 errors," Celeste continued, "were judgment calls. 2 of them were wrong, 2 of them were right, but arrived at the right place through the wrong process." He turned to look at her. "Which 2 were right?" "The morning I had the bad night, you left the tray. You didn't push." She said it flatly, like a report. "And the day your daughter was sick. You told me the truth when most people in your position would have fabricated an excuse or simply disappeared and dealt with the consequences later." Owen leaned back against the counter. "I figured you'd respect the truth more than a clean excuse." "I do." She took a sip of her coffee. "I find most people terrifying in their capacity to lie about small things. It makes me distrust everything else they say." She set the mug down. "You haven't lied to me once, in 2 weeks. That is, not nothing." "No," he agreed. "It's not nothing." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the city was starting to wake up. Somewhere down the block, a delivery truck was idling. A door closed. Normal sounds. The whole ordinary world just going about its business, while the 2 of them sat in this kitchen, with something real and unnamed hovering in the space between them. "I'd like to offer you the permanent position," Celeste said. Owen said nothing for a beat. Not because he was surprised. He'd let himself, carefully and against his better judgment, hope for it. But because he wanted to be sure he answered right. "I want to be honest with you about something," he said. before I say yes." She waited. "I'm not going to get better at being a personal assistant and stay the same kind of father. I can't. Lucy has to be part of this. Not in your house, not in your schedule, but in the sense that I'm a package deal with a kid who gets sick and has school plays and sometimes needs me at 3 in the afternoon. If that's going to be a problem down the road, I'd rather know it now." Celeste held his gaze without blinking. "I'm not hiring you in spite of that," she said slowly. "I'm hiring you partly because of it. A man who would walk out of an interview for his daughter isn't going to disappear on me when something gets hard." A pause. "And things here get hard." "I know they do," he said. "I've seen it." "And you're still here." "Still here," he confirmed. She nodded once, with the precise economical finality of someone signing a contract. "Then we have a deal." He put out his hand. She looked at it for a second, and something crossed her face. Surprise, maybe, at the gesture. She shook it. Her grip was firm, no hesitation. The first month in the permanent role was different from the trial in ways Owen hadn't fully anticipated. During the trial, everything had the quality of a performance. Not dishonest, exactly, but heightened. He'd been careful in the way you're careful when you know you're being evaluated. Now the carefulness became something else. It became habit. It became routine. And routine, Owen was learning, was where the real work happened. The real work was not the schedule, not the correspondence or the medical appointments, or the complex logistics of running someone else's life. The real work was the days when Celeste couldn't get out of bed and wouldn't ask for help, and he had to find the exact right distance to stand. Close enough to be useful, far enough to not crowd her. It was a Tuesday in November when the first real crack appeared. He was helping her transfer from her wheelchair to the chair at her desk, a maneuver that he'd learned required precision and a specific angle and absolutely zero commentary. When something went wrong. He wasn't sure if it was the way he moved or the way she shifted, but she made a sound. Not loud, low and sharp and bitten off. The sound of someone who had been trying not to make that sound for so long that when it finally came out, it surprised even her. He went still immediately. "Tell me what you need." "Nothing," through her teeth. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Tell me what you need." "I said I'm fine, Owen." It was the first time she'd used his first name. Neither of them acknowledged it. But it landed somewhere. "Your right side," he said. "It's been worse this week. I've seen you favoring it." He kept his voice completely level. "Is it the hip or is it higher?" A long pause. "Hip," she said finally. "The joint. Some days are worse than others." "Okay." He helped her the rest of the way into the desk chair, slowly, adjusting the angle. "Have you told your physical therapist?" "She knows." "Has it been worse lately? The last few days specifically?" Silence, which meant yes. "Then I'm going to call Dr. Farrow's office and move your appointment to this week instead of next. You can be angry at me about it if you want." "I'm not angry," she said. Then, after a pause, "I'm used to it being worse and pretending it isn't." Owen pulled his phone out. "That's a hard way to live." "It's the only way I know how anymore." He didn't say anything to that. He dialed the doctor's office instead. But he felt the weight of what she'd said settle into the room. Not heavy in a crushing way, but heavy in the way important things are. Real things. She watched him on the phone, negotiating a same-week appointment with the kind of calm persistence he'd learned to deploy when the other option was being put on hold for 40 minutes. When he hung up, she was still watching him. "Thursday at 2, he said. "You didn't have to do that." You needed it done, and you weren't going to do it yourself. He sat down at his usual chair across the desk. So I did it. That's the job. She looked at him for a moment, with an expression he still couldn't fully read. It was too layered, too guarded, like looking at a painting where the real subject is partially obscured. Then she turned to her work. The job, she said, with a dryness that almost sounded like gratitude. It was around that time that Celeste started asking about Lucy. Not constantly, not with any overt display of interest, just occasionally. A question dropped into a conversation like a stone into still water. How is her reading coming along? You mentioned she was behind. Or, did she get the part in the school play? Or, once, quietly and without particular context, what does she like? What are her interests? Owen answered each question with the same care she asked them, simply, directly, without making a thing of it. She likes dinosaurs, he said one morning. Specifically, the obscure ones. She spent 40 minutes last week explaining to me the difference between a brachiosaurus and an apatosaurus, and genuinely seemed concerned that I didn't already know. She sounds like someone who will one day be very impatient with people who haven't done their research. She is already that person, Owen said. She's 8, and she's already that person. And there it was again. Not a laugh, not quite, but something warmer than what had been there in the beginning. Something that had been growing so gradually that he kept almost missing it and then catching it in his peripheral vision. The way a plant grows, you don't see it moving, but you look up one day and it's reached the light. But Celeste Vaughn didn't do anything gradually without cost. He knew that by now. He'd seen what the good days took out of her, and the bad days took even more. And underneath all of it, beneath the sharpness and the precision and the controlled distance she kept between herself and the world, was something that he recognized because he'd carried a version of it himself. Grief. Not just for the accident, though that was part of it. Grief for the life she'd had before. Grief for the person she'd been. The things she could no longer do. The future she'd mapped out for herself, that had been redrawn without her consent. She'd lost something essential, the way he'd lost something essential. And neither of them had fully made peace with the shape of the life that remained. He thought about that on his commute back to the Bronx one evening, wedged into a subway car between a construction worker and a woman reading a paperback novel, the train lurching through the dark tunnels under the city. He thought about how strange it was that the two of them had ended up in the same room, how easily it could have gone another way, how if the layoff had come a month earlier or later, or if he'd seen a different listing, or if Celeste had looked at his resume and dismissed it in the first 5 seconds, the way she must have dismissed dozens of others. He didn't have a word for what was growing between them. It wasn't friendship. It was too asymmetrical for that, too complicated by the nature of their arrangement. It wasn't anything else he could name with any honesty. It was just a connection. Quiet and unannounced and real, in the way that things are real when they haven't been performed for anyone. He got off at his stop and walked the 4 blocks home through the November cold, hands in his jacket pockets, and thought about Rule 38. When she is having a bad day, she gets quieter, not louder. Quiet is harder than loud. And then he thought about something that hadn't been on any list at all. Something he'd only started to understand slowly, the way you understand things that matter. Celeste Vaughn was not, at her core, an impossible person. She was a person who had been failed by enough people that she'd stopped believing anyone was worth the risk of letting them in. He understood that. He understood it in his bones. And he thought, walking up the stairs to his apartment, where Lucy was probably still awake, and definitely pretending to be asleep, that understanding someone, really understanding them, not fixing them, not pitying them, just seeing them clearly and standing still, was maybe the most important thing one person could offer another. He unlocked the door. Lucy's light was on under her bedroom door. "You're supposed to be asleep," he called out. A pause. Then, "I was reading." "About dinosaurs?" "About dinosaurs." He smiled. A real one, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep and doesn't ask permission. He leaned against the wall in the hallway for a second, just breathing, just being inside the life he had. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was his, and for the first time in a long time, he thought it might have room in it for something more. He knocked on Lucy's door. 5 more minutes, then lights out. 10. 7. A satisfied silence, the silence of a child who has successfully negotiated up from 5. He went to the kitchen to make himself a sandwich, and thought about Thursday at 2 o'clock, and Celeste Vaughn's hip, and the way she'd said his first name like she hadn't meant to, and then didn't take it back. He thought, something is changing. He thought, be careful with it. Then he made his sandwich and let the night be quiet. The Thursday appointment with Dr. Farrow changed something. Owen drove Celeste there himself. The usual car service had a scheduling conflict, and rather than wait for a replacement, he'd simply said, "I'll drive," with the same tone he used for everything. Not asking, not performing, just stating a fact. She had looked at him for a second like she was going to argue, and then decided it wasn't worth the energy. He didn't go into the examination room. He sat in the waiting area with a cup of bad coffee from the machine in the corner and spent 45 minutes answering emails on his phone until she came back through the door. He could read the appointment on her face before she said a word. The set of her jaw. The way she wasn't quite looking at him. He stood up and pushed the wheelchair to the car without speaking. He got her in, folded the chair, put it in the trunk, got behind the wheel. He pulled out of the parking structure and onto the street before she finally said it. "They want to try a new protocol," she said. "Nerve block injections combined with a modified physical therapy regimen. More intensive than what I've been doing." A pause. "Dr. Farrow says the window for meaningful improvement is narrowing. If I'm going to do this, it needs to be now." Owen kept his eyes on traffic. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd think about it." "How long have you been thinking about things like this before deciding not to do them?" The silence that followed was the kind that had edges. "That was out of line," he said, before she could respond. "I'll dial that back." "No," she said, and her voice was different, stripped of something. "No, it wasn't." She turned her head toward the window. 14 months. That's how long Dr. Farrow has been recommending more aggressive intervention, and I've been thinking about it. Owen said nothing. He let that sit. "It hurts," she said very quietly. Not to him, exactly. More like she was saying it out loud for the first time because she'd never let herself say it out loud before. "The therapy I already do hurts. The idea of something more intensive." She stopped. "I know how that sounds. I know there are people who would give anything for the option. It sounds like a person who's already in pain and is being asked to take on more pain with no guarantee of what it gets them," Owen said. "That's not weakness. That's math." She turned from the window then and looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she rarely did, directly and without the layer of composed distance she kept between herself and everything. "Everyone else either tells me to push through it or validates every reason I have not to," she said. "You're the first person who's done neither." "Pushing through it is something other people say when they're not the ones doing the pushing," Owen said. "And validating every reason not to is just comfortable. It doesn't actually help you." "So what are you doing?" "Telling you what it is. You already know what you want to do. I think you made the decision before we got in the car." A long pause. The city moved past outside. A light changed from red to green, and he pulled forward. "I'm going to do it," she said. "I know," he said. The new protocol started the following Monday. Owen rearranged the entire schedule around it without being asked. He moved the Paris calls to mornings, shifted the correspondence window, blocked out recovery time in the afternoons that he labeled in the shared calendar simply as rest, a word Celeste had never once voluntarily put in her own schedule in the time he'd known her. She looked at it without comment and didn't change it. The first injection session left her wrecked. He'd been warned by Dr. Farrow's nurse that the first few sessions were often the worst, the body's resistance before it began to adapt. When he brought her home that evening, she was gray with exhaustion, her hands in her lap and her eyes half closed. And for the first time since he'd known her, she didn't have the energy to hold herself at distance from him. She let him help her to her room without a single word of direction or correction. That was how he knew how bad it was. The absence of instruction. Celeste Vaughn without instructions was Celeste Vaughn at the bottom of something. He got her into the chair by her window, brought water and her evening medication, and asked if she wanted food. "No," she said. "Okay." He moved toward the door. "Owen." He stopped. "Will you?" She started and then stopped, like the sentence had surprised her on the way out. He waited. "Just stay for a minute. You don't have to do anything. Just stay." He turned back and sat down in the chair across from her, and he didn't say a word, and neither did she. And they sat there in the quiet of the room while the last of the afternoon light moved across the floor. He thought about a 4-year-old girl in his lap, not talking, just sitting. He thought about how he'd learned that sometimes sitting there was the whole thing. After a while, her eyes closed. Not asleep, he could tell from her breathing. Just resting. Just letting herself be in the same room as another person, without requiring anything from either of them. He sat there for 20 more minutes. Then he stood up carefully, left the water within her reach, and let himself out. The weeks that followed were hard in the specific way that necessary things are hard. Not pointlessly, not without direction, but grinding. The therapy sessions were twice a week. Some days after them she was functional. Other days she was not. He learned the difference between the two before she said a word, just by the way she came through the door. The angle of her shoulders, the speed she was moving, the particular quality of her silence on the drive home. On the bad days, he reduced everything to essentials: coffee, medication, the minimum of correspondence, no phone calls. On the better days, she worked with a focus that was almost unsettling, like she was making up for lost time, like she could see something ahead of her that she hadn't been able to see before. It was on one of those better days, a Wednesday in December, that she said to him without any preamble, while he was standing at the filing cabinet, "Tell me what happened to your wife." He went still for only a second. Then he closed the cabinet drawer and sat down. "Her name was Diane," he said. "We met when I was 26. She was 24. She was a second-grade teacher. She was the kind of person that rooms got better when she walked into them. Not louder or more dramatic, just better, warmer." Celeste was watching him without expression, her hand still on the desk. "She was diagnosed when Lucy was 3, he continued. Stage 3, so we had time, or we thought we did. She went through chemo, went through all of it. She never complained. In front of Lucy, she was just mom, just completely present, completely there. She only let herself fall apart when it was just the two of us." He paused. That was the hardest part to watch. Not the illness. Watching her protect Lucy from it. And when she passed? Lucy was 4, too young to understand what forever meant, which was both a mercy and a problem, because she kept expecting her mom to come back. He looked at his hands. For about 6 months after, Lucy would set a place at the table for Diane at dinner. She just put the plate there. I couldn't make myself tell her to stop. So I'd set it too. And we'd eat with the empty plate between us. Celeste said nothing for a long moment. "How did you keep going?" she asked. "Practically, I mean, with a 4-year-old and grief and—" "I didn't have the option not to," Owen said. "That's the whole answer. I didn't get to stay in bed. She needed breakfast. She needed her coat. She needed someone to check for monsters under the bed, even when I was the one who felt like the monster." He looked up. "Sometimes not having options is the only thing that saves you." Celeste looked at him with that layered, unreadable expression he'd been studying for months. And then she said something he hadn't expected. "I had options," she said. "After the accident, I had every resource available. Money, specialists, people willing to help. And I still chose to stop." She said it with a precision that sounded like she'd been preparing it, like she'd been working up to it. "Not the treatment. I never stopped the treatment. I stopped living. I arranged everything so I wouldn't have to be touched by anything that might hurt me again. No relationships, no attachments. I fired people before they could leave." She stopped. 112 people. "I know," Owen said quietly. "That's not strength," she said. "I'd convinced myself it was. But you—" She stopped again, pressed her lips together. "You have had more taken from you than I have, and you are the least defended person I've ever met. You're just open, even when it costs you." "It costs me plenty," he said. "I know. I've watched it cost you." She looked away. "I don't know how to do that. I don't remember how." He leaned forward. "You're doing it right now," he said. "This conversation. You couldn't have had this conversation in September. You know that." She turned back. Something had moved in her eyes. Not tears. Celeste Vaughn wasn't there yet. Might not be for a long time. But something adjacent to it. A pressure behind the composure. "Don't make it sentimental," she said. "I'm not," he said. "I'm just telling you what I see." It was 2 weeks before Christmas when Lucy came to the house for the first time. It hadn't been planned. Owen's after-school arrangement had fallen through at the last minute. Mrs. Reyes had a minor medical issue, nothing serious, but enough to keep her from watching Lucy, and there was no one else available on short notice. He'd called Owen from school, and Owen had stood in Celeste's hallway with his phone and a decision to make. He knocked on the study door. "I have a situation." Celeste looked up from her laptop. "My daughter's after-school coverage fell through. I have no one to call." He kept his voice straightforward. "I can take a half day and make up the work tonight, or—" "Bring her here," Celeste said. He paused. "You don't have to—" "I'm aware of what I have to do and don't have to do," she said. "Bring her. She can sit in the library. There are books. I assume she reads." "Constantly," he said. "Mostly about dinosaurs. Then she'll find something." Celeste turned back to her laptop. "Stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're surprised." He stopped looking like he was surprised. Lucy Parker arrived at 14 Aldrich Place at 3:47 in the afternoon, wearing her school backpack and a puffy blue coat, and holding a library book about the Jurassic period that she had checked out that morning and had already read 40 pages of. She stood in the foyer and looked up at the ceiling, and then around at the room with the calm, systematic interest of a child who catalogs environments the way scientists catalog specimens. Owen crouched down to her level. "You remember the rules we talked about in the car? Quiet, polite, don't touch anything on the desk," Lucy recited. "And don't ask why the lady is in a wheelchair, because that's private and she'll tell me herself if she wants to." "Good." He stood up.
"Library's this way." He was walking her past the study when the door was open, and Celeste was visible at her desk. And Lucy stopped. Owen stopped, too. Lucy looked at Celeste. Celeste looked at Lucy. A full 3 seconds passed. "You're Lucy," Celeste said. "Yes," Lucy said. "You're Ms. Vaughn." "I am." "My dad talks about you at home sometimes." Lucy tilted her head. "He doesn't say anything bad. He's very careful not to say anything bad about people he works for. My mom taught him that." Celeste's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Your mother sounds like she was wise." "She was a teacher," Lucy said. "2nd grade. Dad says she could get 27-year-olds to listen to her at the same time, which he says is basically a superpower." "He's not wrong about that." Lucy glanced at the bookshelves, visible through the study door. "Do you have any books about the Cretaceous period?" Celeste paused. "The library at the end of the hall has a natural history section." "Third shelf from the left." "Thank you," Lucy said, with the precise politeness of a child who had been taught that courtesy was non-negotiable. Then she looked back at Celeste with the frank, unfiltered directness that only children have, the kind that bypasses all the careful management adults put between themselves and the truth. "Does it hurt a lot?" she asked. "Being in the wheelchair?" Owen opened his mouth. "Lucy," he started. "It's all right," Celeste said. She looked at the girl steadily. "Yes," she said. "Some days, quite a lot." Lucy nodded, processing this with complete seriousness. "My mom was sick for a long time before she died," she said. "She used to say that the hardest part wasn't the pain. It was when people pretended they didn't notice, so she felt like she had to pretend too." She adjusted her backpack strap. "I think that's worse. Having to pretend." Celeste was very still. "I'm going to go find the Cretaceous book now," Lucy said. She looked at Owen. 45 minutes until homework time?" 45 minutes, he confirmed. Lucy disappeared down the hallway. Owen turned back to Celeste. Her face was not broken, not undone, but something in it had shifted in a way he hadn't seen before. Like something had moved through a wall that had held a very long time. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She doesn't filter." "Don't apologize," Celeste said. Her voice was careful, controlled, but something underneath it was not. "Please don't apologize." He nodded and started to pull the study door closed. "Owen." He stopped. She hadn't looked away from the doorway where Lucy had been standing. "She's extraordinary." He let himself look at her for a moment. This woman who had fired 112 people because the alternative was being known, who had arranged her entire existence around the project of not being touched by anything, who had said she didn't remember how to be open. She was looking at the empty doorway where an 8-year-old girl had just told her the truth, and her hands were flat on the desk, and she was breathing slowly and deliberately, the way a person breathes when they are trying to hold something together. He understood. He knew exactly what Lucy's honesty had landed on, and what it cost to receive it. "I know," he said. "She gets that from her mother." He pulled the door almost closed and walked down the hallway to check on Lucy, who had already pulled 3 books from the 3rd shelf and was sitting cross-legged on the library floor, her coat still on, reading. He stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment. Then he went back to finish the afternoon's work. From the study at the end of the hall came only silence. But it was the kind of silence that Owen Parker, after months of learning to read Celeste Vaughn's silences, recognized as something particular, something he hadn't heard from her before. It was the silence of someone sitting inside a feeling they weren't trying to escape. For her, that was new. For her, that was everything. Christmas came to 14 Aldrich Place quietly, the way Celeste Vaughn did most things, without announcement, without sentiment, and with a precision that suggested she had thought about it more than she intended anyone to know. Owen noticed the wreath on the front door on a Monday morning in mid-December. It hadn't been there Friday. He didn't comment on it. He went inside, made the coffee, checked the schedule, and waited. By Wednesday, there was a small arrangement on the hallway table. By the following Monday, something had changed in the library. He walked past and saw that someone had placed a single candle on the windowsill, and a handful of books had been turned face out on the shelf, their spines showing, and one of them was about dinosaurs of the Cretaceous period. He stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at that. Then he went to make the coffee. Lucy had been back to the house twice more since that first afternoon, both times for the same reason, coverage falling through. And both times Celeste had said, "Bring her," before Owen finished explaining the situation, as if the answer had already been decided and the explanation was just a formality. Lucy went to the library, pulled books off the third shelf, and sat on the floor with her coat on, reading. Once she'd knocked on the study door and asked Celeste a question about a word she didn't understand. Cephalopod. And Celeste had explained it with the focused, unsentimental precision of someone who had been waiting for a question worth answering. Owen had been in the hallway when it happened and had not made a sound. The third time Lucy came, she didn't go directly to the library. She stopped in the study doorway and said, "I finished the Cretaceous book. The one about the mosasaurs?"
Did you know they could grow to 50 feet long?
"I did know that," Celeste said, without looking up. "Most people don't," Lucy said, with the tone of someone who had been disappointed by this repeatedly. "Dad didn't know." "Your father knows a great deal about structural load-bearing," Celeste said, still not looking up, "and almost nothing about marine reptiles. These are both facts I have accepted." Lucy looked at Owen. Owen put his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "There's a book in the third row about Spinosaurus," Celeste said. "It's the one with the red spine. It's more current than the others." Lucy was already moving toward the library. Owen looked at Celeste. She was still looking at her screen, but the corner of her mouth had done the thing. The almost thing. The shadow of a smile that she kept on a very tight leash. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she said flatly. "I'm recommending a book. It's not a significant gesture." "Okay," he said. But they both knew it was. The setback came in January, the way setbacks usually do, without warning and at the worst possible moment. It was a Thursday, the day after a particularly brutal physical therapy session that had left Celeste exhausted in a way Owen hadn't seen in weeks. He arrived in the morning to find the house already tense. Mrs. Adler moving through the kitchen with her mouth in a straight line, and Priya very deliberately not making eye contact with anyone. "What happened?" Owen said. Not a question. Mrs. Adler poured his coffee and set it in front of him and said very carefully, "Her sister called last night." Owen set down his bag. Celeste had a sister named Patricia, who lived in Boston and appeared twice a year in the email correspondence as the person responsible for sending passive-aggressive messages about Celeste's life choices disguised as concern. Owen had drafted exactly 0 responses to those emails because Celeste had told him on day 3 of his employment to mark Patricia's name as low priority and never to bring her messages to his attention unless they contained legal or medical information, which they never did. "What did she say?" Owen asked. Mrs. Adler looked at him with the expression of someone about to hand you something heavy. "Apparently, Patricia has decided that Celeste's current situation is no longer manageable by one employee, and she's engaged a care management firm, a full-service agency,
4 staff members, 24-hour coverage, a live-in medical coordinator. She paused. She's coming on Saturday to present the arrangement. Owen was quiet for a moment. Does Celeste know? Celeste found out at 11 o'clock last night. I don't know when she slept, if she slept. She was in the study when I arrived at 6:30. He picked up his coffee and walked to the study. Celeste was at her desk. She had been at her desk for hours, he could tell. The particular stillness of someone who had been sitting in the same position long past the point of comfort, holding themselves together through sheer intention. She looked up when he came in, and the expression on her face was one he hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger, though anger was in there. It was something older and rawer than anger. It was the expression of a person who has been told, in the clearest possible terms, that someone who is supposed to love them does not believe they are capable of running their own life. "You've heard," she said. "Mrs. Adler told me." He sat down across from her. "Are you all right?" "No." She said it without hesitation, without any of the usual management, just no, plainly, the way a person answers when they're too tired to perform. "Patricia has been waiting for a reason to do this since the accident. She thinks—" She stopped, started again. "She has always believed that my life is something that needs to be administered, that I need supervision, that left to my own decisions I will—" She pressed her lips together. "What?" Owen said. "Fall apart." She said it like the words tasted bad. "She has never once, in 3 years, asked me what I need. She's only ever decided what I need and then tried to install it." Owen looked at her steadily. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell her no." "She's coming Saturday." "Then she can come Saturday and hear it in person." Celeste's jaw was set. "I am not a patient. I am not a ward. This is my home and my life, and I have been running it adequately." Her voice caught slightly, just slightly, before she pulled it back. "I have been running it." "You have," Owen said. "You have been running it." She looked at him. "You're not going to tell me to consider it, to think about what she's proposing?" "Why would I tell you that?" "Because everyone else would. Because the reasonable, measured, both sides response is to say that she means well, and perhaps there are elements worth considering." "Celeste," he leaned forward, "she is trying to take away your autonomy. That is not something that requires both sides' consideration. That requires a clear no." The silence that followed was full. She looked at him with something in her eyes that he recognized now. That pressure behind the composure. The thing that had been building since December. Since Lucy stood in the doorway and told her the truth about pretending. "You always do that," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Say the thing I already know but can't let myself say. You just say it, without flinching." "That's the job," he said. "Stop saying that," she said. "Stop saying it's the job." He held her gaze. A beat passed. 2. "Okay," he said. "Then it's not the job. It's just—" He paused, choosing carefully. "I see you clearly. That's all. I see who you are and what you're capable of, and I'm not interested in handing that over to a care management firm." She looked away, but she didn't close down. That was new. 6 months ago she would have closed down. She sat with it instead, let it exist in the room between them. "Stay on Saturday," she said, "when Patricia comes. I'll be here." Patricia Vaughn arrived at 11 on Saturday morning, in a camel-colored coat, and the expression of a woman who had already decided how the meeting was going to go. She was 2 years older than Celeste, taller, with a kind of composed, deliberate manner that in a different context might read as warmth, but in this one read clearly as management. She stopped when she saw Owen. "You must be the assistant," she said. "Owen Parker," he said, and extended his hand. She shook it with the precise, assessing pressure of someone taking a measurement. "I didn't realize you'd be present for this." "Celeste asked me to stay," he said.
Patricia looked past him toward the study.
"Of course she did." She moved toward the door. Owen stepped to the side to let her pass, but Celeste's voice came from inside before Patricia reached the threshold. "Come in, Patricia, and say what you came to say quickly. I have a full afternoon." He stayed near the door. Not in the room, he understood the line, but close enough that Celeste knew he was there. Through the partially open door, he heard the shape of the conversation without every word. Patricia's voice was careful and modulated, the voice of someone who had prepared. She talked about resources, about sustainability, about appropriate levels of care. She used the word comprehensive twice and the word professional 3 times, in a way that made it clear she did not consider Owen to be either of those things. Then Celeste spoke. Owen had heard Celeste Vaughn in negotiations, in legal calls, in the focused, controlled delivery she used when she was ending a discussion.
He'd heard her at her worst and at her most exhausted, but he had never heard what he heard now, which was Celeste Vaughn speaking from somewhere below all of that, below the control and the sharpness and the distance. "Patricia," she said, "I want you to hear me, not to respond, not to counter, just to hear." A pause. "I know what you're afraid of. I know you look at my life and see something that scares you. And I know that what you're offering comes from that fear, and that the fear comes from love, some version of it. I'm not disputing that." Silence from Patricia. "But you have been treating me like a problem to be solved since the day I came home from the hospital," Celeste continued. "And the one thing I needed, the one thing, was to be treated like a person who was still here, still capable, still mine." Her voice was steady, not cold, not sharp, just true. "I have a good life. I have work that matters to me and people around me who see me. I don't need to be managed. I need to be believed in. Those are not the same thing." The silence from Patricia lasted a long time. Owen stood in the hallway and breathed. When Patricia came out, her face was different than it had been going in. Not defeated, not converted, but something had moved in it. She stopped when she saw Owen and looked at him for a moment. "Take care of her," she said. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even quite a request. It was the surrender of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just, reluctantly, put a piece of it down. "I will," he said. The afternoon after Patricia left was quiet. Celeste didn't want to work. Owen made tea. She'd been drinking more tea lately, less coffee. A shift he'd noted and adjusted to without comment, and brought it to the sitting room where she'd moved after the meeting. She was by the window, looking out, and he set the tea on the table beside her and straightened up to leave. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She picked up the tea and held it with both hands, and they sat there in the pale January light and didn't say anything for a while. "She asked me once," Celeste said eventually, "about a year after the accident, whether I'd thought about making different arrangements, living arrangements. She meant moving somewhere with more support. A facility." She said the word with a flatness that communicated exactly what it had felt like to hear it. "I told her I would rather burn the house down." She didn't bring it up again, but she never stopped thinking it.
She's afraid of losing you, Owen said. People who are afraid of losing someone sometimes try to take them over entirely. It's backwards, but it's real. Celeste turned her head toward him. Where did you learn that? Grief support group, he said. After Diane died. I went for about 4 months. Mostly sat in the back and didn't say anything, but I listened. He paused. There was a man there whose son had a serious illness, and he said the hardest thing he'd ever had to learn was the difference between holding on and holding down. He said he'd been holding his son down for years and calling it love. Celeste was quiet. I think about that a lot, Owen said. Do you ever hold down? She asked. Not provocatively, genuinely. He thought about Lucy, about the empty plate at the table that he'd never asked her to stop setting, about the nights he'd kept her close because he couldn't stand the thought of anything else being taken. Probably, he said. I try not to, but probably. She nodded slowly, like she was filing something away. Then she said, The therapy is working. He looked at her. Dr. Farrow's assessment last week? There's measurable improvement in the nerve response, more than she expected at this stage. She said it the way she said most things that mattered, carefully, without drama, like she was testing how it sounded out loud. She said if I continue at the current rate, there was a realistic possibility of partial restoration of function in my left leg. Not complete, partial. But that's significant, Owen said. It's not certain. No, but it's real. She looked at him. I didn't tell you immediately because I needed to sit with it. I do that with things that... She stopped. With things that matter. I need to hold them alone for a moment before I can share them. I understand that, he said. I know you do. She set down her tea. You're the first person in a long time I've wanted to share something with after sitting with it. He looked at her. The January light was thin and clear. Her face was open in the way he'd been watching it learn to be, slowly, reluctantly, and completely. Celeste, he said carefully, because the moment felt like something that could be broken by the wrong word. I need you to know something. And I need to say it once clearly, without it changing anything between us unless you want it to. She went still, but she didn't look away. What I feel when I'm here, it stopped being professional a while ago. He kept his voice steady, even, just the truth, the way he'd always given it to her. I'm not acting on that. I'm not asking for anything, but I won't pretend it isn't there. Because I told you from the beginning I would never lie to you, and this would be the biggest lie of all. Silence. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed. How long? She said. Honestly? He looked at his hands. The morning you told me to take my daughter home. When you said go, and I heard what it cost you to say it. He looked back up at her. A while. She was quiet for a very long time. Her face was doing the thing, the pressure behind the composure, the held feeling. And then she did something that stopped him entirely. She reached across the space between them and put her hand over his. Not squeezing, not gripping, just placing it there, the way you place something down carefully when you've been carrying it for a long time, and you finally found a surface you trust. I don't know how to do this, she said. Whatever this is. Neither do I, he said. Not again. Not from here. Then we don't have to know, she said. We just... She paused, and he watched her find the words, this woman who always had words, finding new ones for something she'd never said before. We just stay in it, whatever it is. We don't have to name it yet. Okay, he said. We don't have to name it. Her hand stayed where it was, and Owen Parker, who had learned over the last year to read the silences of a woman who had built her life around not being known, recognized this one without any difficulty at all. It was the silence of someone who had finally stopped running from the one thing they needed most.
He didn't move. He didn't say anything else. He just stayed. Spring came to Manhattan the way it always does. Not all at once, but in arguments. Cold one day, warm the next. The city unable to commit. The trees pushing out buds anyway, because they'd learned not to wait for permission. Owen noticed it on his walk from the subway to Aldrich Place. The way the light had changed. The angle of it in the mornings. Softer and more direct at the same time. He'd been making that walk for 8 months now. He knew every crack in the sidewalk, every corner where the wind cut, every bodega where the owner nodded at him because he'd started stopping in on Tuesdays for Lucy's chocolate milk. 8 months. He'd been here 8 months, and the man who had stood outside that iron gate in September with polished shoes and borrowed confidence felt like someone he'd read about, rather than someone he'd been. He pressed the intercom. The gate buzzed open before he said his name. That was new. 3 months ago, Celeste had changed the intercom protocol. His buzz pattern, 2 short, 1 long, opened the gate automatically. He'd never asked for it. She'd never explained it. It was just there one morning, the way the wreath had been, the way the Cretaceous book had been, the way all of the things she did that mattered were simply, quietly, installed into the fabric of the day without commentary. He went in and made the coffee. The physical therapy results had continued to hold. Dr. Farrow's assessment in February had been cautious but clear. The nerve response improvement was sustained, the left leg showing measurable increases in voluntary movement. Not walking, not yet, and maybe not ever in the way Celeste had walked before, but movement. Real, measurable, her own movement, controlled by her own will, returning to a body that she had spent 3 years grieving. Owen had been in the waiting room for all of it. Every appointment, every assessment, every session where Celeste went in and came out wrung out and quiet and burning with something that was equal parts pain and determination. He'd learned not to ask how it went. She'd tell him when she was ready. He'd have the car warm and the seat adjusted, and he'd drive. And somewhere between the clinic and Aldrich Place, she'd say something. Sometimes it was clinical. Range improved. Farrow wants to add another session per week. Sometimes it was more than that. One evening in February, she'd come out of a session and gotten into the car, and he'd pulled into traffic, and she'd been quiet for 4 blocks before she said, "I moved my left foot today. Deliberately. I told it to move, and it moved." He'd kept driving. He didn't trust himself to say anything that would be adequate. "It sounds like nothing," she said. "It doesn't sound like nothing," he said. 3 years, she said. 3 years of it just... She stopped. I'd stopped believing it was mine anymore. That foot. I'd started thinking of it as something that happened to me, rather than something that was me. Her voice was careful, controlled, carrying enormous weight very precisely. And then today it just moved. He pulled to a stop at a red light. He looked over at her. She was looking straight ahead, her jaw set the way it got when she was fighting to hold something together. And her eyes were bright in a way he'd only seen twice before, and both times it had meant she was right at the edge of something. "Celeste," he said. "Don't," she said. "If you say something kind right now, I will completely lose it, and I refuse to cry in this car." "Okay," he said. The light changed. He drove. "You moved your foot." "I moved my foot," she said. "That's yours," he said. "It's yours." She didn't respond. But when he glanced over 30 seconds later, she had turned her face toward the window, and he gave her the privacy of not looking again. It was Lucy who broke the remaining distance between the two of them,
the way Lucy broke most things. Without meaning to, without strategy, simply by being entirely herself. It was a Saturday in March, which had become, without any formal arrangement, a day Owen sometimes brought Lucy to Aldrich Place. Not every Saturday, not even most Saturdays, but enough that Lucy had established what she considered to be her shelf in the library, third row, left side, and had strong opinions about the organization of it. On this particular Saturday, Lucy had been in the library for 2 hours when she appeared in the doorway of the study where Owen and Celeste were working through a contract review. "I have a question," Lucy announced. "You have many questions," Celeste said, without looking up from the contract. "Narrow it to the most urgent."
Do you like my dad?
Owen stopped reading. Celeste lowered the document very slowly and looked at Lucy with an expression that was equal parts controlled composure and something beneath it that was not controlled at all. "That is a complicated question," Celeste said. "It's actually not," Lucy said. "It's yes or no. The complicated part is what you do about it, but the question itself is simple." Owen looked at the ceiling. "Lucy," he said. "I'm just asking," she said, in the tone of a child who understood perfectly well that she was doing more than asking. She looked at Celeste with that frank, unfiltered directness, the gaze that didn't know how to lie because it hadn't learned yet that lying was an option. "Because I like you," she said. "A lot. You're kind of scary sometimes, but you're also really fair, and you know things about a lot of subjects, and you recommended the Spinosaurus book, which turned out to be the best book I've read this year." She paused.
And my dad is happier than he's been in a long time. Like, I can tell. He makes better sandwiches when he's happy. Don't tell him I said that.
"I'm right here," Owen said.
I know, Lucy said.
Celeste was looking at the girl with an expression Owen had never seen on her face in 8 months of learning to read every expression she had. It was unguarded. Completely, entirely unguarded. Like every wall she'd ever built had been asked a question it didn't know how to deflect. "Yes," Celeste said, quietly, directly. "I like your father." Lucy nodded, satisfied. "Okay," she said. "I'm going back to finish my chapter." And she turned and walked back down the hallway, completely unbothered, her work apparently done. The study was silent. Owen looked at Celeste. Celeste looked at Owen. And then, finally, completely, without reservation, she smiled. Not the shadow of a smile, not the almost thing, not the carefully leashed corner-of-the-mouth version she'd been allowing herself in increments for months. A real one, wide and real and entirely unmanaged. It changed her face the way dawn changes a room, not adding anything that wasn't there, just revealing everything that was. Owen felt it land somewhere in the center of his chest and stay there. "She's terrifying," Celeste said. "I told you," he said. "Day one. I told you." He did. She looked down at the contract in her lap. "You tell me the truth about everything. I've never known anyone who does that." "I learned it from her, mostly," he said. Celeste looked up. "Owen." "Yeah?" "I'm not good at this, whatever this is. I want you to know that going in. I'm not—" She stopped, restarted. "I have spent a very long time making sure that nothing could reach me, and that means I don't know how to do what regular people do. I will get it wrong. I will close down at the wrong moments, and I will push back when I should let things in, and I will make this harder than it needs to be." "I know," he said. "You know, and you're still—" "I'm still here," he said. "I've been here. That part isn't new." She held his gaze. "Why?" "Because you're worth it," he said.
You've been worth it since about day 4, when you threw that book and then looked at me like you were exhausted in every direction, and I thought, that's a person who has been fighting alone for so long, they've forgotten what it feels like to not fight alone. He paused. I know that feeling. I didn't want you to keep having it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the book was Edith Wharton. I know. I put it back. I know you did, she said. I noticed. Summer arrived, and with it a kind of life at 14 Aldrich Place that no one who had known it in the 2 years before Owen arrived would have entirely recognized. Lucy came on Saturdays with regularity and increasing permanence. First, her shelf in the library, then a drawer in the hallway table where she kept a spare set of colored pencils and a notebook. Then a coffee mug in the kitchen cabinet that Mrs. Adler had moved to the lower shelf, without being asked, so that Lucy could reach it herself. Small territories, claimed quietly, the way a child establishes belonging. Not by declaring it, but by leaving pieces of herself in places that are allowed to stay. Celeste had begun standing. Not walking, not yet, but standing. With assistance, with careful, deliberate effort, at the parallel bars in the therapy room that Dr. Farrow had suggested converting the basement gym into, she stood. The first time, for 11 seconds. The second time, 14. By June, she was holding 40 seconds without assistance, her hands hovering near the bars, but not gripping them, her whole body taut with concentration and something that was not quite triumph, but was its first cousin. Owen was there for all of it. He didn't cheer. She told him early on that cheering was condescending, that she wasn't a child learning to walk. She was a person reclaiming something that was already hers, and that what she needed from him was not applause, but presence. So he was present. He stood at the edge of the room and he watched. And when she finished and looked over at him, he just nodded. Steady. Certain. I see you. I know what that cost. I'm not going anywhere. She always nodded back. Same energy, same language, the private vocabulary of two people who had spent enough time together that they no longer needed to translate. One evening in July, after a particularly strong session, she sat across from him in the therapy room, hands on her knees, still breathing from the effort, and said, I want to tell you what happened. The accident. I've never told anyone the full version, just the medical facts when necessary. Owen sat with her. Only if you want to. I want to, she said. I've wanted to for a while. I just needed to be steady enough. She told him. He listened. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer responses, didn't shape it in any way. He just let it come out. All of it. The way she needed it to. The car. The other driver. The surgery afterward and waking up, and what the doctor's face looked like before he said the words, and how she'd known from that face before she heard a single word. The calls she'd made. The things she'd lost. The version of her future that had been in her hands one moment and gone the next. When she finished, the room was quiet.
3 years of carrying that, he said. 3 years, she said. And it still... She exhaled. It still has weight. I thought the more I worked at the recovery, the lighter it would get. But the weight doesn't go away. You just get stronger. Yeah, Owen said. That's exactly how it works. She looked at him. Diane. Diane, he agreed. Still has weight. I just got stronger. She reached over and took his hand. Not gently, firmly, the way she did everything that mattered to her, with the full commitment of a person who had decided and was not walking it back. He turned his hand and held hers, and they sat in the therapy room in the July evening,
while the city made its sounds outside, and neither of them said anything for a while, because nothing needed to be said. It was October, 1 year, almost exactly from the day Owen had stood outside the gate with his last $20 and his iron shirt, when Lucy asked the question that had apparently been forming in her mind for some time. They were at the kitchen table at Aldrich Place, all three of them, which had also become a quiet regularity. Saturday lunches, nothing formal, Mrs. Adler usually off by noon, and Owen making sandwiches, because Celeste had declared his sandwiches, apparently on the basis of some internal assessment system he wasn't aware of, to be acceptable. Lucy was eating and reading simultaneously, which was a habit Celeste had initially found inadvisable, and then had given up opposing when she realized she herself did the same thing. She put her book down, which Owen had learned meant something important was coming, and looked at Celeste. "Are you and my dad going to get married?" she asked. Celeste put her glass down. Owen set down his sandwich. "That is a very direct question," Celeste said. "I'm a direct person," Lucy said. "You've said that's an admirable quality." "I've said it's a quality. I may have let admirable be implied." "So is it implied or not?" Owen rubbed the back of his neck. "Luce." "I want to know," Lucy said, and her voice had shifted slightly. Still direct, still Lucy, but underneath it, something that was not argumentative at all. Something that was 8 years old, and quietly, carefully, hoping. "I'm not trying to be weird about it. I know you're not my mom. I know that's not what this is. I just—" She looked at Celeste. "I think you make my dad not lonely. And I think he makes you not lonely. And I just want to know if that's going to be permanent." The table was very quiet. Celeste looked at the girl with that open, unguarded expression, the one that had first appeared on a December afternoon when Lucy had told her the truth about pretending. The one that had been appearing more and more as the months passed, as the walls came down, as the life she'd arranged so carefully to keep everything out had somehow become a life that was letting something in. "I don't know yet," Celeste said, honestly. "That's not a deflection, it's the truth. Some things take time to become clear." Lucy nodded, thinking about this. "But you're not going to go away," she said. "Right? You're not going to decide it's too hard and everyone goes back to how it was before." Celeste held her gaze. "No," she said. "I'm not going to go away." "Okay," Lucy said, and she picked up her book. Owen looked at Celeste over Lucy's head. Celeste looked back at him, and something passed between them that had no name in any language he knew. Something that was part certainty and part wonder, and entirely real. He proposed on the Thursday evening in November. No grand gesture, no plan setting, no staging. He had the ring, Diane's ring, reset in a new band because he'd wanted to honor what was and build what would be. And because Lucy had helped him choose the new setting at a jeweler in Midtown and had been vibrating with barely contained self-congratulation for 3 weeks. And he'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Until he realized that with Celeste Vaughn, the right moment was never going to announce itself, because she was not a woman who trafficked in grand moments. She was a woman who lived in the small ones. So he did it in the kitchen. She was at the table with her tea, going over a contract, and he came and sat across from her, the way he had 1,000 times, and he said, "I need to ask you something." She looked up. He put the ring on the table between them. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at him. "Owen." "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I know it's not simple, and I know you have 112 reasons cataloged somewhere to say no. And I know this is the kind of thing that terrifies you more than anything, because it's the most exposed you can be, asking someone to stay. He kept his voice steady. But I'm already here. I've been here. And I'd like to be here with a word for it. She looked at the ring. Her hands were flat on the table. It was Diane's, he said. Reset. New band. Lucy helped. Something moved across her face at that. Of course she did. She has opinions, he said. She has many opinions. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. No, she was not going to say she refused to cry. Not this time. Not with him. Not anymore. You told me once that not having options is the only thing that saves you sometimes, she said. That you kept going because Lucy needed breakfast and her coat and someone to check for monsters. Her voice was careful and full. I want to be one of your reasons to keep going. I want to be that for you. You already are, he said. She reached out and picked up the ring. She held it for a moment. Then she set it back down and said, yes. No ceremony, no performance, just yes. Simply and completely. The way she did everything that truly mattered. With her whole self. Nothing held back. He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it there. He looked at her looking at it. I'm going to get this wrong sometimes, she said. So am I, he said. I'm going to close down and push back and... Celeste, he said. I've been here a year. I know who you are. All of it. I'm asking for all of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. And she looked at him, with all the walls down, nothing between them, no performance, no management. Just this woman who had spent 3 years making sure nothing could reach her. Reaching. I know you are. Mrs. Reyes cried at the wedding. Priya cried. Mrs. Adler stood at the back of the small ceremony they held in the garden at Aldrich Place in May, and maintained perfect composure until the exact moment Owen and Celeste said their vows, at which point she produced a handkerchief from somewhere and pressed it to her face, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this possibility and was not going to be caught off guard by it. Patricia flew in from Boston and sat in the front row and cried the most of all, which surprised no one who understood that the people who fight hardest against a thing are often the ones who need it most. Lucy stood beside Owen in a blue dress she'd selected herself and held the rings on a small pillow, and took this responsibility with such absolute seriousness that she did not smile once during the entire ceremony. Not because she wasn't happy, but because she understood, in the way she understood most important things, that some moments deserved to be held carefully. Afterward, when the garden had filled with the small crowd of people they'd invited, and the evening was warm and full of voices, Lucy found Celeste beside the garden table and stood next to her and slipped her hand into Celeste's without saying anything. Celeste looked down at her. Lucy was looking out at the garden, watching the people, calm and certain and exactly herself. Lucy, Celeste said. Yeah. Thank you for asking the hard questions. Lucy looked up at her. Someone had to, she said simply. Celeste tightened her hand around Lucy's small one. Someone had to, she agreed. Owen watched them from across the garden, his daughter and his wife, standing side by side in the evening light, holding on, and he thought about a crumpled job listing at the bottom of a recycled newspaper pile, and the last $20 bill on a kitchen table, and the sound of an iron gate buzzing open for the first time. He thought about 47 rules and a book against a wall, and a breakfast tray left outside a door. He thought about Diane's empty plate and 4 years and the long, grinding work of becoming someone who could still love people after being broken by losing one. He thought about how none of this had been planned, how it had all come from one desperate morning and one honest answer, and one woman who had been failed by enough people that she'd stopped believing anyone would stay. He had stayed. They had stayed together,
And the life that had been shattered, his, hers, the small, brave life of an 8-year-old girl who set a place at the table for her mother for 6 months because she wasn't ready to stop believing, had not been replaced by a new one. It had been extended, grown, filled in at the broken places by something that was stronger than what was lost. The way healed bone is always denser at the fracture. The way scar tissue holds. Owen Parker crossed the garden toward his family. He had come to this house with nothing but the truth and the willingness to stay, and it had turned out that those were the only two things that had ever mattered at all.